Some people forget
Tại
their
sao anh
first
lại
love,
nhớ?
but some
Vì
spend 20 years
anh
trying
chưa
to
bao giờ
find her
quên em.
again.
Em
The
cũng
elevator
không.
doors
Tình yêu
slid
của anh
open with a
mãi mãi.
soft chime as
Và của
Clara
em
Bennett
nữa.
stepped into the marble hallway of the penthouse suite on the 48th floor overlooking Manhattan. Her fingers tightened around the rare first edition novel pressed against her chest, the bookstore receipt fluttering slightly in the cold air from the ceiling vents. Everything about this place screamed money. The polished black floors reflected the golden chandelier light above her. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a glittering skyline soaked in December rain. Even the silence felt expensive. Clara swallowed hard and glanced down at her thrift store coat, suddenly aware of the worn sleeve near her wrist. "Just deliver the book and leave," she whispered to herself. The bookstore owner had practically begged her to make the delivery personally after the billionaire client requested same-day service. Apparently, when Ethan Walker wanted something, the city moved. Clara had heard the name before. Everyone had. Tech billionaire. Youngest CEO featured on Forbes that year. Cold. Brilliant. Untouchable. She adjusted the strap of her bag and stepped farther inside after the house manager quietly motioned her toward the study. "Mr. Walker will be with you in a moment." Clara nodded politely, but the second she entered the room, her breath caught. Sitting beneath the warm glow of a desk lamp was a small framed sketch drawn in faded pencil. A little girl sitting on the hood of an old pickup truck, staring up at stars. The lines were shaky and imperfect, childlike, but unmistakable. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "No." Slowly, Clara stepped closer. Her fingertips trembled before they even reached the frame. In the bottom corner were two tiny initials written exactly the same way she used to sign her drawings as a kid. C.B. Clara Bennett. The room suddenly felt smaller. The sound of rain against the windows faded beneath the roar building in her ears. She remembered drawing that picture when she was 14 years old during one humid August night in a tiny Pennsylvania town most people would never remember. She remembered the boy sitting beside her with grass stains on his jeans and dreams too big for that town. "Ethan, I wondered how long it would take you to recognize it." The voice behind her was deep now. Smooth. Older. Clara froze. Every muscle in her body locked before she slowly turned around. Ethan Walker stood near the doorway in a charcoal suit with rain still clinging to the shoulders of his coat. Taller than she remembered. Broader. His dark hair perfectly styled, his sharp jaw shadowed slightly beneath the city lights. But his eyes were exactly the same. Blue. Steady. The kind that always looked at her like she mattered. Clara's lips parted, but no words came out. Ethan studied her quietly for a second that somehow felt like 20 years. Then the corner of his mouth lifted into the faintest smile. "You still stare at things when you're nervous," he said softly. Clara let out a shaky breath. Ethan, his name barely escaped her throat. She had imagined this moment before in stupid little daydreams she never admitted to anyone. But not like this. Never like this. Not inside a billionaire penthouse with Manhattan glowing behind him like a movie scene. Her eyes flicked back toward the drawing. "You kept this?" she whispered. Ethan walked toward her slowly until only a few feet separated them. "I kept everything you ever gave me." Clara's chest tightened painfully at the words, because she suddenly realized something terrifying. She had spent years trying to forget him, but Ethan Walker never had. Clara could not stop staring at him. The last time she had seen Ethan Walker, he was 14 years old, standing beside an old train platform in a faded denim jacket with dirt on his sneakers and impossible dreams in his eyes. Now he stood in front of her wearing a watch that probably cost more than her apartment building. Yet somehow, the way he looked at her had not changed at all. "You disappeared," she whispered before she could stop herself. The words slipped out sharper than she intended. Ethan's expression softened, but something heavy flickered behind his eyes. "I know." Silence settled between them, thick and uncomfortable. Outside the penthouse windows, rain rolled down the glass in silver streaks while traffic lights blurred across Manhattan below. Clara suddenly became aware of how fast her heart was beating. She tightened her grip on the delivery receipt in her hand, like it could anchor her back to reality. "I should go," she said quickly. "The bookstore closes in 40 minutes." Ethan glanced at the rare novel sitting on his desk. "You still work at Bennett Books?" Clara nodded cautiously. "Part-time." His eyes shifted back to her face. "Your mother used to let me hide there after school whenever my father was drinking." Clara blinked in surprise. Most people forgot details like that. Ethan never did. He walked toward the bookshelf lining the far wall and carefully pulled out a small, worn object Clara instantly recognized. Her breath caught again. A faded blue friendship bracelet with tiny silver stars woven into the thread. She had made it for him during one summer when they spent nearly every night lying on the hood of his uncle's pickup truck counting constellations above the fields outside town. Ethan ran his thumb slowly across the bracelet before holding it out slightly. "You tied this around my wrist the night before I left." Clara stared at it like it belonged to another lifetime. "I cannot believe you still have that." Ethan gave a quiet smile that did not fully reach his eyes. "I could not throw away the only good thing from that town." The honesty in his voice hit her harder than she expected. Clara looked away first. She moved toward the windows, trying to steady herself as the city lights stretched endlessly below. "You became exactly what you said you would," she murmured softly. Ethan leaned against the edge of the desk. "Not exactly." Clara frowned slightly. "You are one of the richest men in New York." "And you think that means I got everything I wanted?" he asked quietly. The question lingered in the room. Clara did not answer because suddenly she remembered another version of Ethan. A skinny teenage boy sitting beside her beneath fireworks during a 4th of July fair whispering, "One day, I am getting us out of here." Back then she believed him, until he vanished without goodbye. "You never wrote back," she said before she could stop herself again. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. For the first time since she arrived, he looked uncertain. "I did," he said. "Every month for almost a year." Clara turned toward him slowly. "What?" Ethan walked to a drawer and pulled out a thick bundle of envelopes tied together with a dark ribbon. Clara's stomach dropped when she saw her own name written across them in familiar teenage handwriting. "They all came back unopened," Ethan said quietly. "Every single one." Clara stared at the letters with trembling hands, because she had never seen them before in her life. Clara stared at the bundle of letters in Ethan's hands as if they might disappear if she blinked too hard. The old envelopes were slightly bent at the corners, the paper yellowed with time, but her name was still there in dark blue ink. Clara Bennett, written by a 14-year-old boy who had promised her he would never leave without saying goodbye. Her throat tightened painfully. "No," she whispered. "That is not possible." Ethan stepped closer and carefully placed the letters on the desk between them. "My aunt mailed every one of them," he said quietly. "After we moved to Chicago, I kept writing. Birthdays, Christmas, the day I got my first job, the day I got accepted into college." His jaw flexed slightly before he continued. "But they all came back." Clara shook her head slowly, confusion washing across her face. "I never saw these." Ethan studied her carefully, like he was trying to measure whether she was telling the truth. Then something shifted in his expression. Not anger. Sadness. Deep and old. Clara reached for the top envelope with trembling fingers. The postmark read October 12th, 2009. She slowly opened it, careful with the brittle paper inside. Her chest tightened the second she saw the messy teenage handwriting. "Clara, Chicago is louder than I thought it would be. I hate it here. There are too many people and no stars at night. I miss our bookstore. I miss the lake. I miss you most. I promised I would come back for you one day. I still will. Ethan." Clara's vision blurred instantly. She swallowed hard and opened another letter. Then, another. Every single one carried pieces of a boy growing up without her. Stories about working late shifts at a grocery store. Stories about getting rejected from internships. Stories about sleeping 3 hours a night while building his first software company in a tiny apartment. And hidden inside every letter was the same thing. Her name. Her memory. Her. "Why would my mother hide these from me?" Clara whispered softly, more to herself than him. Ethan looked toward the rain-covered windows. "Maybe she thought forgetting me would protect you." Clara pressed her lips together. The answer hurt because it sounded possible. After Ethan left town, everything in her life had started falling apart. Her father disappeared 6 months later. Medical bills swallowed what little savings they had. Her mother spent years exhausted, working double shifts at the diner while Clara gave up art classes and college applications just to help keep the lights on. Survival became more important than dreams. Ethan watched her carefully. "You really never knew?" Clara looked up at him with tears gathering in her eyes. "I waited for you at the train station for 3 hours that night." Ethan froze completely. "What?" Clara let out a shaky laugh that sounded more broken than amused. "You said you would meet me before leaving town. I stood there in the rain like an idiot with that stupid sketchbook under my coat. Ethan's face drained of color. Clara, you never came. Silence crashed down between them. Ethan lowered his eyes for a second before rubbing a hand across his jaw. My uncle got into a fight with my father that night. We left 2 hours early. His voice grew quieter. I did not even get to go back home. Clara stared at him as old memories unraveled painfully in her chest. 2 teenagers. 2 different versions of the same heartbreak. 20 years spent believing the wrong story. Ethan slowly stepped closer until only inches separated them now. His voice dropped almost to a whisper. I thought you stopped caring about me. Clara looked down at the letters scattered across the desk between them. And I thought you forgot me the second you left town. Ethan's eyes softened in a way that made her heart ache. Clara, he said quietly, forgetting you was the one thing I never learned how to do. The rain had stopped by the time Clara finally left Ethan's penthouse, but Manhattan still glistened beneath the midnight lights like the city itself was holding onto old memories. She stood on the sidewalk outside the tower for several seconds, unable to move, her mind replaying every word he had said upstairs. Forgetting you was the one thing I never learned how to do. The sentence wrapped around her chest like warmth and ache at the same time. Clara pulled her coat tighter against the cold December wind and started walking toward the subway station, but her thoughts kept dragging her backward through time. Back to the tiny Pennsylvania town where everything once felt simpler. Back to a boy with messy dark hair who used to climb through her bedroom window carrying candy bars and astronomy magazines from the gas station. Ethan had always looked at the world differently. While everyone else complained about the town being boring, he used to point at airplanes crossing the sky and say things like, "People are building lives somewhere bigger than this." Clara smiled faintly at the memory before sadness quickly followed, because she had spent years convincing herself those memories only mattered to her. Her phone buzzed suddenly inside her pocket, pulling her back to reality. A text from the bookstore owner flashed across the screen. Clara, did the delivery go okay? Clara stared at the message for a second before typing back. Yeah, just got delayed. She did not know how to explain that the billionaire client from the news used to be the boy who once sat beside her on a broken dock eating cheap peach popsicles in the middle of July. The next morning, Clara arrived at Bennett Books just before 8. The little shop smelled like old paper, coffee, and cedarwood polish, exactly the way it always had. She loved this place despite the leaking ceiling near the history section and the flickering sign outside that only lit up half the letters after dark. It felt safe here. Familiar. Real. You look terrible, Mrs. Green announced from behind the register. While stacking new arrivals, Clara let out a tired laugh. Good morning to you too. The older woman narrowed her eyes. You saw a ghost or a man? Which one? Clara froze for half a second. Mrs. Green immediately pointed a finger at her. Definitely a man. Clara tried focusing on organizing returned books, but Ethan's face kept invading her thoughts. The letters. The bracelet. The way his voice changed whenever he said her name. It was nobody, Clara muttered weakly. Mrs. Green snorted. That billionaire customer has been calling this store for years, sweetheart. Do not insult my intelligence. Clara slowly looked up. What? Mrs. Green paused mid-stack. Wait, you did not know? Clara's stomach tightened. Know what? The older woman blinked in confusion. Ethan Walker bought books from this store online for years. Rare editions mostly. Sometimes children's books. Clara stared at her silently. Mrs. Green continued casually, unaware that Clara felt like the floor had shifted beneath her feet again. He used to ask about your mother too. Sent donations anonymously after her surgery back in 2016. Clara's blood ran cold. What surgery? Mrs. Green frowned. Your mother never told you? Clara slowly shook her head. Mrs. Green lowered the book in her hands. Honey, the hospital bill was almost $90,000. Somebody paid it overnight. Clara could barely breathe now. Her mother had always claimed insurance covered everything. Ethan. It had been Ethan. The bell above the bookstore door suddenly chimed softly. Clara turned automatically toward the entrance and froze. Ethan Walker stood there in a dark wool coat dusted with snowflakes, his blue eyes locked on hers immediately, like they had never learned how to look anywhere else. For a second, neither of them moved. The little bookstore suddenly felt too small for everything hanging silently between them. Snow drifted past the windows outside while customers wandered quietly through the aisles, completely unaware that Clara Bennett felt like her entire life had just tilted sideways again. Ethan's eyes stayed on her as he closed the door softly behind him. "You did not tell me you were coming here," Clara said carefully, trying to steady her voice. Ethan slipped his hands into the pockets of his coat. "You left my penthouse before I could ask if you were okay." Mrs. Green glanced between them with shameless curiosity before suddenly clearing her throat. "I just remembered I need to reorganize the storage room upstairs." Clara shot her a look, but the older woman was already disappearing up the staircase with a knowing smile. Ethan looked around the bookstore slowly, taking in the shelves, the faded reading chairs, the handwritten recommendation cards Clara always tucked beneath novels. "It still smells the same," he murmured softly. Clara folded her arms. "You say that like you remember every detail." Ethan looked back at her. "I do." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tighten again. Clara looked away first. "You should not have paid for my mother's surgery." Ethan was quiet for a second. "Your mother needed help. $90,000 is not help, Ethan." "To me it was." Clara stared at him in disbelief. "Why would you do that without telling me?" Ethan's expression shifted slightly, softer now, almost tired. "Because I knew you would never accept it if I offered directly." Clara hated that he was right. Silence settled between them again while snowflakes drifted slowly beyond the glass storefront. Ethan stepped closer to a nearby shelf and smiled faintly when he spotted a worn astronomy book. "You still keep this?" Clara glanced over. It was the exact same stargazing guide they used to check out from the library as teenagers because neither of them could afford to buy it. "Some habits stay," she admitted quietly. Ethan pulled the book free carefully, flipping through the pages until he stopped suddenly. A folded piece of paper slipped out. Clara's eyes widened instantly. "Wait," but Ethan had already opened it. The old sketch was faded now, but still recognizable. A drawing of a boy lying on the hood of a truck beneath stars with the words "Someday, we leave this town" written beside him. Ethan stared at the page silently. Clara felt heat rush into her face. "I drew that when I was 16, she muttered awkwardly. Ethan's thumb brushed lightly over the paper. "You kept it." Clara let out a nervous laugh. "Apparently so." He looked up slowly, and for one dangerous second, Clara forgot how to breathe. There was something almost heartbreaking in his expression. Not because he was rich, not because he was powerful, but because he looked at that old sketch like it mattered more than every skyscraper he owned. "You were the first person who ever believed I could become something," he said quietly. Clara swallowed hard. "You did become something." Ethan shook his head slightly. "No, I became successful." His eyes stayed locked on hers. "That is not the same thing." The words lingered heavily between them. Clara suddenly realized how exhausted he looked beneath the polished image the world saw on magazine covers. Like success had built him a beautiful life that still somehow felt empty. The front windows rattled softly from the winter wind outside. Ethan glanced toward them before looking back at her. "Come have dinner with me tonight." Clara blinked. "What?" "One dinner," he said calmly. "No reporters. No business meetings. Just us." Clara hesitated instantly. Every logical part of her screamed that this was dangerous territory. Ethan Walker belonged to a world filled with cameras, private jets, and headlines. She belonged to late rent notices and coffee stains on bookstore receipts. But then Ethan smiled slightly and added, "I found the old diner from our hometown." Clara stared at him in shock. "In Manhattan?" "Brooklyn," he corrected softly. "The owner moved 10 years ago." He tilted his head slightly. "They still serve peach pie." And just like that, 20 years disappeared from between them again. Clara spent the entire afternoon pretending she was not distracted. She alphabetized books she had already organized twice, spilled coffee grounds beside the espresso machine, and nearly handed a customer a gardening guide instead of the mystery novel he asked for. Every time the bookstore door chimed, her heart jumped before she could stop it. By 6:30, snow had started falling harder outside, coating the sidewalks of Brooklyn in soft white layers that reflected the city lights like glass. Clara stood in the tiny employee bathroom, staring at her reflection with growing frustration. "It is just dinner," she whispered to herself. But deep down, she knew it was not just dinner. It was Ethan. It was unfinished history. It was every memory she had buried because remembering hurt too much. She finally settled on a dark green sweater dress she rarely wore and brushed her hair twice before immediately feeling ridiculous for caring. At exactly 7:03, headlights swept across the bookstore windows. Clara glanced outside and froze when she saw Ethan stepping out of a black town car, snowflakes landing across the shoulders of his coat. He looked completely out of place on the old Brooklyn sidewalk. Too polished, too expensive. Yet the second he looked through the glass and saw her, his entire expression softened in a way no magazine photograph had ever captured. Clara stepped outside, pulling her coat tighter against the cold. Ethan opened the passenger door for her without a word. "You still hate being late," she murmured as she climbed inside. Ethan smiled faintly. "You still notice everything." The drive across Brooklyn felt strangely easy, like no time had passed at all. Ethan asked about the bookstore. Clara asked about his company. He answered simply, almost reluctantly, like talking about billion-dollar deals interested him less than hearing her describe the old poetry section she reorganized last month. The diner sat on a quiet corner beneath a glowing red sign dusted with snow. Clara stopped walking the second she saw it. "No way," she breathed. Ethan shoved his hands into his coat pockets, suddenly looking almost nervous. "I may have bought the original jukebox from Pennsylvania too." Clara laughed before she could stop herself. A real laugh this time, warm and surprised. Ethan stared at her for half a second too long after hearing it, like the sound alone had been worth rebuilding an entire diner 3 states away. Inside, the place smelled like coffee, butter, and fried onions. Old country songs played softly from the speakers while snow tapped gently against the windows. Clara slid into the booth across from Ethan, still in disbelief. "You rebuilt our diner in Brooklyn," she said slowly. Ethan shrugged slightly. "The original owner was retiring. I did not want it disappearing." Clara shook her head, smiling despite herself. "That is insane billionaire behavior." Ethan laughed quietly. "Probably." For the first time since reconnecting with him, Clara saw traces of the boy he used to be beneath the billionaire image everyone else worshipped. The awkward teenager who used to steal extra fries from her plate and pretend he hated romance movies while secretly crying during emotional scenes. A waitress approached carrying menus, then froze mid-step after recognizing Ethan. Her eyes widened slightly. "Mr. Walker, we did not realize you were coming tonight." Ethan glanced toward Clara immediately, almost apologetically. "I asked for privacy." "Of course," the waitress said quickly before hurrying away. Clara watched the interaction silently. There it was again, the reminder that Ethan did not belong to ordinary life anymore. Even here, people treated him differently, carefully, like his presence changed the temperature of every room he entered. Ethan noticed her expression immediately. "What?" Clara looked down at the menu. "Nothing." "Clara." She sighed softly. "Does it ever get exhausting?" Ethan leaned back slightly. "What?" "Everyone looking at you like you are more important than them." Ethan was quiet for a second before answering honestly. "It gets lonely." Clara looked up then, really looked at him. And for the first time, she realized Ethan Walker might have built an empire big enough for the whole world to know his name, while still secretly wishing someone would look at him the same way she did before he had anything at all. The waitress brought their peach pie a few minutes later, setting the plates carefully onto the table while sneaking another glance at Ethan. Clara noticed it immediately. Everyone noticed him. Even when he was sitting quietly in a booth beneath dim diner lights, there was something about Ethan Walker that pulled attention toward him like gravity. The waitress finally walked away, and Clara picked up her fork slowly. "You used to hate peach pie," she said. Ethan smiled faintly. "I hated peaches." Clara narrowed her eyes. "You still ate my slice every single time." "That was because you always left the crust." Clara laughed softly, shaking her head. The sound seemed to relax Ethan instantly. For a while, conversation came easily. They talked about old classmates, the bookstore, the lake outside their hometown, where Ethan once fell through a rotten dock plank trying to impress her. Clara had not laughed this much in years. But every now and then, reality crept quietly back in. Usually in the form of Ethan's phone vibrating against the table every few minutes with messages he ignored without even checking. "You can answer it," Clara finally said after the fourth interruption. Ethan glanced at the phone before turning it face down. "Nothing there matters more right now." The words landed harder than they should have. Clara looked down quickly at her coffee cup. Dangerous, she thought. This was becoming dangerous. Because the more time she spent with him, the easier it became to forget the enormous distance between their worlds. Ethan noticed her growing quieter. "Where did you go just now?" he asked softly. Clara forced a small smile. Nowhere. Ethan leaned forward slightly. You still do that too. Do what? Disappear into your own head when something scares you. Clara looked up at him then. This scares me. Ethan's expression softened immediately. Me? No, she admitted honestly. How easy this feels. Silence settled gently between them while snow drifted outside the windows. Ethan studied her carefully before speaking again. It feels easy to me too. Clara's chest tightened. She hated how much she wanted to believe this could somehow exist outside tonight. Outside this booth. Outside nostalgia. Then a sudden flash of light exploded through the diner window. Clara blinked in confusion before another flash followed. Ethan's entire expression changed instantly. Not angry. Not annoyed. Tired. Deeply tired. Clara turned toward the window and saw two photographers standing across the street pointing cameras directly at the diner. Her stomach dropped. Ethan immediately stood. Stay here, he said quietly. But, before he could move farther, the diner owner rushed over nervously. Mr. Walker, there are reporters outside now. More cars just pulled up. Clara's chest tightened painfully. Of course there were. Men like Ethan did not get quiet dinners in Brooklyn. They got headlines. Cameras. Gossip blogs desperate for the next story. Ethan rubbed a hand across his jaw before pulling cash from his wallet and placing it on the table. I am sorry, he said quietly to Clara. She forced a smile even though disappointment was already creeping painfully into her chest. You do not control paparazzi. Ethan looked at her carefully. No, but I brought this chaos into your life the second I walked back into that bookstore. Outside, camera flashes kept reflecting through the windows like tiny lightning strikes. Clara suddenly imagined tomorrow morning headlines. Billionaire Ethan Walker spotted with mystery woman. She could already hear customers whispering at the bookstore. People assuming she chased him for money. Ethan must have seen the fear crossing her face because his voice softened instantly. Clara, I think I should go home, she said quietly. Ethan looked like he wanted to argue, but instead he nodded once, respecting her space the same way he always used to. He grabbed his coat and walked her toward the back exit through the kitchen. Snow crunched softly beneath their shoes when they stepped into the empty alley behind the diner. The city suddenly felt quiet again away from the cameras. Clara pulled her coat tighter against the cold while Ethan stood beside her beneath the dim yellow light above the back door. I meant what I said earlier, Ethan murmured. Clara looked up at him. About what? His blue eyes held her steadily. Nothing in my life has ever felt more important than finding you again. Her breath caught instantly. Ethan stepped closer, close enough now that snowflakes landed softly in his dark hair. And I do not want to lose you a second time. Clara barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan standing beneath falling snow with that look in his eyes like losing her again would destroy something inside him that had already been fragile for years. By morning, Manhattan was buried beneath fresh white snow, the city quieter than usual beneath pale gray skies. Clara stood behind the bookstore counter, holding a coffee she had forgotten to drink while her mind replayed every moment from the diner. Nothing in my life has ever felt more important than finding you again. The words refused to leave her alone. Her phone buzzed against the counter. One new message. Ethan. Clara hesitated before opening it. I know things moved fast yesterday. No pressure. No cameras. No expectations. But there is something I want to show you tonight. Her stomach tightened instantly. Before she could overthink it, another message appeared. It has to do with the train station. Clara froze completely. 20 years ago, that station had been the place where her heart first broke. The place she stood alone in the rain, clutching a sketchbook while believing Ethan Walker had chosen to leave her behind forever. She stared at the message for almost a full minute before finally replying with a single sentence. Okay. At 7 that evening, Ethan picked her up himself instead of sending a driver. Clara noticed immediately that he looked tired. Not physically, emotionally. Like the last few days had cracked open parts of him he normally kept locked away from the world. They drove north out of Manhattan in silence while snow drifted softly across the windshield. Where are we going? Clara finally asked quietly. Ethan glanced at her briefly before returning his eyes to the road. You will see. 40 minutes later, the car slowed near an empty train station outside the city. Clara's breath caught the second she recognized it. Not the original station from Pennsylvania, but almost identical. Same brick walls. Same iron benches. Same flickering yellow platform lights glowing against the snow. Ethan parked quietly before stepping out into the cold. Clara followed slowly, confusion building in her chest. Snow crunched beneath their shoes as they walked toward the empty platform. No passengers. No noise. Just winter air and the distant sound of train tracks humming somewhere far away. Ethan stopped beneath one of the old lamps and reached into the pocket of his coat. "I came back to our hometown 3 years ago," he said quietly. Clara looked at him carefully. "Why?" Ethan let out a slow breath, white clouds curling into the cold air. "Because after everything I built, I realized none of it fixed the one thing that still hurt." Clara's chest tightened painfully. Ethan pulled something from his pocket, then held it out toward her carefully. Clara looked down and froze. It was an old train ticket sealed inside protective plastic. The paper was faded and wrinkled with age. December 18th, 2009. Her stomach dropped. "No way," she whispered. Ethan's voice softened. "The station manager found it after closing that night. My aunt picked it up the next morning after she realized what happened." Clara's hands trembled as she took it carefully. A tiny water stain still marked the corner from the rain 20 years earlier. Ethan had kept it all this time. "You saved this?" she whispered. Ethan looked at her with quiet honesty. "I saved every piece of proof that you once waited for me." Tears burned instantly behind Clara's eyes. Snowflakes landed softly in her hair, while the platform lights glowed above them like faded memories refusing to disappear. Ethan stepped closer slowly. "I was late once," he murmured, his voice barely above the winter wind now. "I will never be late for you again." Clara looked up at him, her heart shaking beneath the weight of everything he had carried silently for 2 decades. And in that moment, standing on a quiet train platform surrounded by falling snow and unfinished history, Clara realized something terrifying. She was falling in love with Ethan Walker all over again. The weeks after the train station felt almost unreal to Clara, like she had somehow stepped into a life that belonged to someone else. Ethan became part of her days quietly, carefully, as if he understood how fragile her trust still was. Some mornings he showed up at the bookstore carrying coffee exactly the way she liked it, too much cream and 1 packet of sugar. Other nights, he called just to ask if she remembered the name of the old song they used to hear blasting from pickup trucks during summer fairs. Back home. And somehow, despite the billion-dollar company, the headlines, the endless meetings waiting for him somewhere beyond the city skyline, Ethan always made her feel like she was the center of his attention. But the thing that affected Clara most was not the money. It was the remembering. Ethan remembered everything. The freckles on her shoulders from one summer spent at the lake. The fact that she hated thunderstorms but loved snow. The way she tapped her fingers against coffee mugs whenever she was anxious. Sometimes it felt impossible that another human being had carried pieces of her for 20 years so carefully. One snowy evening in February, Ethan asked Clara to close the bookstore early. "I want to show you something," he said with that familiar softness in his voice. Clara laughed quietly while locking the front door behind them. "You say that sentence way too often." Ethan smiled. "And somehow you still come with me every time." 40 minutes later, they pulled up outside an old brick building in Brooklyn Clara had never seen before. The windows glowed warmly against the winter night, while golden lights spilled onto the snowy sidewalk. Clara frowned slightly. "What is this place?" Ethan looked almost nervous suddenly, which startled her more than anything else. Billionaires were not supposed to look nervous. "Go inside," he said quietly. Clara pushed open the doors slowly and froze the second she stepped inside. Her breath caught so sharply it almost hurt. Bookshelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Soft reading chairs sat beneath warm hanging lights. Paintings from local artists covered exposed brick walls, while quiet piano music drifted through the space. In the center of the room hung a carved wooden sign. "Starlight House." Clara's eyes immediately filled with tears. Ethan stepped beside her carefully. "You once told me every small town deserved a place where lonely people could feel less alone," he said softly. Clara looked around in disbelief. "Ethan, it is a bookstore," he continued quietly. "An art space. Free classes upstairs for kids who cannot afford them." His blue eyes found hers then. "I built the place you dreamed about. When you were 14. Clara could barely breathe now. "How long have you been planning this?" Ethan gave a small smile. "Longer than I want to admit." Clara turned slowly, taking in every detail. A corner reading nook with astronomy books. Old photographs of Pennsylvania framed beside local artwork. And near the back wall, beneath soft golden lights, sat a familiar worn sketchbook inside a glass display case. Her sketchbook, the one she carried to the train station 20 years ago. Clara walked toward it slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks now. Beside the sketchbook was a small handwritten card in Ethan's familiar messy handwriting. Even if the whole world changes, I will still look for you. Clara covered her mouth as emotion crashed through her chest all at once. When she finally turned around, Ethan was already standing behind her, holding a small velvet box in trembling hands. For the first time since she had found him again, the billionaire disappeared completely, and all she could see was the boy from the lake with impossible dreams in his eyes. Ethan swallowed hard before speaking softly. I spent 20 years building everything except the life I actually wanted. His voice shook slightly now. And the truth is, home never felt like a place without you in it. Clara's tears fell harder instantly. Ethan opened the velvet box carefully, revealing a delicate ring with tiny diamond stars wrapped around the band. So, Clara Bennett, he whispered, after all this time, will you finally let me come home to you?